A religion of progress based on the apotheosis of a future fortunate generation is without compassion for either the present or the past. It addresses itself with infinite optimism to the future, with infinite pessimism for the past. It is profoundly hostile to the Christian expectation of resurrection for all mankind, for all the dead, fathers and forefathers. This Christian idea rests on the hope of an end to historical tragedy and contradiction, valid to all human generations, and of resurrection and eternal life for all who have ever lived.
Welcome to the Subversive Orthodoxy Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mullen, and I'm excited to have you with us. This is a podcast about philosophy and meaning. It is about how we as humans withstand the challenges of our cultures. It is about the general Judeo-Christian revelation of God in the world and how the bloodiest century ever recorded couldn't kill that revelation. It's also about how that revelation, tossed aside as archaic, outdated, and obsolete, may be the very life-giving power we need to resist this distracted techno state we're living in, full of anxiety, depression, and teenage suicide.
Thrilling entertainment. It's the inside story packed with drama.
Nikolai Berdyaev was born in 1874 into a fading aristocracy of Imperial Russia. Berdyaev's life unfolded between two cultural earthquakes, the death rattle of the Tsarist regime and the rise of Soviet totalitarianism. He came of age as Russia staggered toward revolution, and his thought carries the scars of collapse and the stubborn hope of resurrection. In many ways, Berdyaev stands on a spiritual bridge between Dostoevsky, who foresaw the spiritual terror of freedom, and Solzhenitsyn, who chronicled the moral wreckage of its suppression. As a young man, Berdyaev was drawn to Marxist activism. He was arrested and exiled in 1898 for revolutionary involvement, but he quickly found that materialist systems, even ones promising justice, left the soul starved. His early exposure to Marxism ignited a lifelong quest for a deeper liberation, not just political or social freedom, but existential and spiritual freedom, freedom as the very ground of being. He turned towards Orthodox Christianity, not in the institutional sense, but as a mystical inheritance alive with fire and risk. Berdyaev's vision was shaped by the Russian Silver Age, a brief, shimmering moment of spiritual and artistic renaissance before the Bolshevik darkness fell. Alongside thinkers like Florensky and Bulgakov, Berdyaev helped forge a Christian personalism rooted in freedom, creativity, and dignity of the human person. But Berdyaev refused to be anyone's partisan. He was too radical for the church, too spiritual for the Marxists, too mystical for the liberals, and too prophetic to be comfortable anywhere. Arrested again after the revolution, he was exiled from Russia in 1922 by a personal order of Lenin, put aboard the infamous philosopher's ship with over 150 other dissident intellectuals. He lived the rest of his life in exile in Paris, where he wrote feverishly in poverty and obscurity. From his cluttered apartment, he published books that challenged the dominant ideologies of his age. The Destiny of Man, Freedom and the Spirit, Slavery and Freedom, The Meaning of the Creative Act. His style was not systemic. It was explosive, less a philosophy textbook than a running monologue with the infinite. He looked the part of the prophet, gaunt, sharp eyes, wild hair, and prone to outbursts of passion and brooding silence. Friends described him as intense, eccentric, allergic to small talk. Oh, I can relate to that. And consumed with spiritual fire. He lived simply with his wife Lydia and a fellow seeker who shared his exile and spiritual hunger. They had no children, but together they built a life of integrity, hospitality, and truth-seeking. Berdyaev died in 1948, far from his homeland. He never saw the collapse of the Soviet system he was so clearly warning against. But his thought would quietly shape the post-war Christian imagination, echoing through the works of Dorothy Day, Gabriel Marcel, and Jacques Maritain. and preparing the ground for Solzhenitsyn's moral witness decades later. Today, when ideology again threatens to eclipse the person, when spiritual yearning is met with cynicism and coercion, Berdyev's witness feels piercingly relevant. He reminds us that Christianity is not a cultural weapon, nor a system of control, but a revolution of the spirit, a call to become fully human by becoming radically free. He gives us no blueprint for utopia, only the dangerous freedom to create, to love, to stand before God without fear. He calls us to live as artists of the soul, even amidst the ruins of modernity. Stay with us as we explore the life and thought of Nikolai Berdyaev, exile, mystic, heretic, prophet, and perhaps one of the most urgent voices of our time. So welcome, Professor, back to the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here, Travis. Still recovering from Chesterton.
Yeah, Chesterton was
Yeah.
was a fun time.
Yeah.
You feel a little hungover, Chestertonian hangover?
Well, yeah, I think there is a kind of transition from Chesterton to Berdyaev. So he's a really important figure that's going to get us from Chesterton to Dostoevsky and further on into our 20th century quest.
Yeah, and just to put that in historical context, can you briefly and succinctly give us the timeline between Dostoevsky to Solzhenitsyn? You said Pasternak and Berdyaev have been pretty much contemporaries.
Well, I think their lives sort of lapped over, so they were alive um, at the same time for a few years or 10 years or so. So I guess that technically makes them contemporaries at a certain point. But Dostoevsky, I think he died in 1881. So he's part of the golden age that preceded the 19th century. Um, and he sort of, represented really a visionary, prophetic alteration of Russian literature into almost like secular scripture, a whole new psychological realism that is going to test the limits of modern art and modern thought, and carry it into new territory. Berdyaev was sort of you know, a revolutionary Marxist that found himself thrown in jail by the very people he thought would support his ideas.
Which
And
happened to Solzhenitsyn too.
yeah, and this radicalized him in a new way, and it took him back to his Christian roots and his understanding of a prophetic Christianity that was was built on freedom and creativity that transformed societies, and not a transformative society built on a small minority that were going to manage everybody else. And once he realized that exile was really going to open the doors to his freedom of thinking and his ability to be prophetic, he never looked back. And I think your little summary of him is well put. That living in exile, living on the outskirts of exiled Russian intelligentsia is not a bad place for a prophet to be. And he took it as liberation and as a calling, and not as a punishment, which created all these incredible books that he wrote. And kind of a lot like Chesterton, if we think of Chesterton as a great apologetic voice at the turn of the century, Berdyaev is a prophetic voice. You know, a Not that Chesterton wasn't prophetic, but Berdyaev hits all the notes of a Christian and even Old Testament prophet. Um,
Well, would you do us a favor and read? Do you have your book out?
yeah,
Would you read pages 42 and 43? We have my friend and I, Tyrell. Shout out to Tyrell who loved this
yeah,
chapter.
Yeah.
Tyrell sent me the things he had underlined, and they're all the same stuff I had underlined. So
Okay.
if you just read your work in your voice, from the first paragraph on 42.
Is that the one that begins was one of the 19th century? Berdyaev was one of those late 19th century. Is that
Yeah, yeah.
paragraph?
From that
Okay.
paragraph
Yeah.
to the bottom line after his quote on the second page. Like, it might be a lot, but it's just completely loaded with good stuff. And it's in your voice and it's from the book, so I just think we should read it. It's so much of it we had underlined.
Okay. Well, this is for your friend here. Nikolai Berdyaev was one of those late 19th century progressive Russian theocrats who became disillusioned with Marxism after the Bolsheviks threw him into prison. He then returned to his Christian faith with a new energy, commitment, and resolve, developing most of his innovative ideas while living in exile in Paris, where he died in 1948. Berdyaev was orthodox in his Christocentric theology, but avant-garde in his existential critiques of Marxism and the new bourgeoisie, orthodox in his admiration of Christianity of Dostoevsky, Soloviev, and Tolstoy, but avant-garde in his application of their ideas to Russian literature and art and politics. He was orthodox in his use of Christian categories to launch moralistic critiques of contemporary thinkers and social trends, but avant-garde in his apocalyptic reading of history and his rejection of moral gradualism and material progress.
And if you might pause for one interjection here, this next paragraph really describes what I see as American culture, and he was speaking to his culture back then.
For him, the word bourgeois meant more than just middle class. It was a state of the soul characterized by a degrading clutching after security and a small-mindedness incapable of imagining a world much larger than one's own. The bourgeois didn't worship money per se, but they were addicted to personal success, comfort, security, and happiness. For these things, they willingly compromised their honor, ignored injustice, and betrayed truth, replacing these high values with trite moralisms and facile bromides that blurred important distinctions and justified selfish actions. Gone were the aristocratic intangibles and noblesse oblige. In came certainty, self-promotion, and moxie. The bourgeois, in other words, was an idolater, proud of his idolatry. And although the bourgeois spirit has always existed, Berdyaev believed that it had reached its peak in the late 19th century when the desire for affluence triumphed over any residual aspiration for holiness, greatness, or genius. The moral debasement of Western civilization continued in the 20th century, with the middle class gaining such power and influence that the word bourgeois became synonymous with mean-spirited wealth, narrow-minded technological know-how, and a preoccupation with worldly success. The cultural ideas of the knight, the monk, the philosopher, and the poet were all suspended by the cultural ideal of the businessman and entrepreneur. The will to power had been usurped by the will to well-being. Berdyaev remarks, and this is a quote from Berdyaev, a religion of progress based on the apotheosis of a future fortunate generation is without compassion for either the present or the past. It addresses itself with infinite optimism to the future, with infinite pessimism for the past. It is profoundly hostile to the Christian expectation of resurrection for all mankind, for all the dead, fathers and forefathers. This Christian idea rests on the hope of an end to historical tragedy and contradiction, valid to all human generations, and of resurrection and eternal life for all who have ever lived. That's part of Berdyaev's book, the Meaning of History, which I think is one of his more prophetic texts.
That's cool.
The bourgeois did not repudiate religion, but reinterpreted its value in terms of utility. The love of the poor moved to the periphery of the faith and was embraced only insofar as it didn't clash with one's personal economic interests. This inversion of means and ends, so central also to Matthew Arnold's critique of the modern Philistines in Culture and Anarchy, signaled for Berdyaev the death of the spirit and the birth of the bottom line.
Let's keep going to get his other quote here.
And then he wrote, the perfected European and American civilizations gave rise to the industrial capitalist system, which represents not only a mighty economic development, but the spiritual phenomenon of the annihilation of spirituality. The industrial capitalism of civilization proved to be the destroyer of the eternal spirit and sacred tradition. Modern capitalist civilization is essentially atheistic and hostile to the idea of God. The crime of killing God must be laid at its door rather than at that of the revolutionary socialism, which merely adapted itself to the civilized bourgeois spirit and accepted its negative heritage.
So the fun facts and the notable works. So your favorite was the Meaning of History?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go, let's just give the audience what he did do, what he created.
Okay.
So his most notable works are The Meaning of the Creative Act, which is an interesting title because the new guy probably read that, Rick Rubin, and wrote a book called The Creative Act.
Yes, yes.
It's called The Meaning of the Creative Act by Berdyaev back in 1916. It'd be interesting to see if he used a lot of it or ideas from it.
Or if he'd even heard of it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Oh.
So then Freedom in Spirit, 1927.
Mm-hmm.
Comprehensive philosophical work. Destiny of Man, 1931. Deep meditation on human nature, purpose, and eschatology. He wrestles with a lot of theology in that one.
Mm-hmm.
Most accessible and widely read book is that one, Destiny of Man.
Mm-hmm.
Next is Slavery and Freedom, 1939. A powerful examination of the modern crisis. So that one has a lot to do with capitalism and socialism. So that's pretty cool if that's what you'd be interested in reading. Then number 5, The Divine and the Human, 1949, posthumous. So this came out after he died.
Yeah.
In his late work, he reflects on the relationship between time and eternity, divine and human, freedom and providence. It's dense and mystical, rich with eschatological insight.
Yes.
Sounds cool. And then there's a few more. Philosophy of Freedom was an earlier one, 1911. Precursor to some of his later works. Christianity and Class War, 1933. Critique of Marxism and its moral spiritual implications. He argues that true Christianity is incompatible with class hatred or revolutionary violence. That's kind of awesome. Class hatred. We have a lot of class hatred currently in our country.
Oh, yeah.
He emphasizes.
You just throw this in. One of his sort of dialectical interventions was to critique Hegel and Marx's master-slave dialectic, which was also something that Nietzsche was fascinated by, the working out the master-slave dialectic, and Berdyaev said, "Well, no, it's not. We don't really have a master-slave dialectic. We have the free and the bound dialectic, and freedom is a cosmic attribute to the human identity. that we're cosmically free from his point of view, and that freedom precedes liberation and democracy and reform and revolution. It doesn't come after it. But as long as we begin with the master-slave dialectic, where we're sort of perpetually bound to our own unfreedom, and that's why faith comes out of freedom, and his Christian understanding of Christ's revelation of the freedom of man is central to his faith and his eschatology.
I wonder
yeah.
if Berdyaev got that concept from the New Testament, where you have slave and master in the same church gathering together as brothers.
Yeah,
Like
I no
experiencing
longer
actual freedom together despite their human socio situation.
Yeah, exactly. No longer any slave or master, no longer any bound and free, right? We're all one in
Brothers.
Christ.
Yeah.
And that was primary to his understanding of what a real revolution would be overcoming that dialectic, not making bets on it and trying to pit one side against the other.
Yeah. And then his other ones were Beginning and the End, History, Apocalypse, and Future of Humanity. Gosh, this guy wrote some deep stuff.
Yeah.
Truth and Revelation, 1947, Nature of Truth, Religious Experience, Inadequacy of Dogma Alone.
Yeah.
And then these are super interesting concepts he wrote about. Dream and Reality, 1949, more poetic, introspective work where Berdyaev reflects on his own inner life, dreams, spiritual experiences, and how they reveal eternal truths. Part memoir, part mystical philosophy. Wow.
I've been trying to get that. I wanted to have that copy so we could look at some of that. Well, we'll have to, maybe we can do that at another time. But it's fascinating to sort of see the kinds of experiences he had as philosopher exile, and his dreams and his understanding of himself, and
Yeah.
that would be fascinating just on the face of it. But
So
we're just seeing his big picture today, so we don't have to go.
yeah, one thing that I was wondering about was like, who knows about him? Because I had never heard of him before your book, and other people that have read the book, they're like, wow, Berdyaev is amazing. Why haven't more people heard about him? It sounds like people who knew about him were academic philosophers and theologians. He made it on their radars. Orthodox theological circles in Europe, Catholic and Orthodox thinkers. Merton talked about him. Dorothy Day talked about him. So it's a lot of people in your book, actually. Existentialists and Christian mystics talked about him. And then Russian studies, you might have heard about him. Why isn't more well known is that he defied categories. He was too mystical for mainstream philosophy, too independent for institutional religion, too esoteric for politics, and it made him hard to market and hard to canonize.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you go into your professor at theology school and you say, I've got my topic for my dissertation. And he says, well, who are you going to write about? You say Berdyaev. He says, you might have to go to the literature department or somebody who's a little more open to rhetoric, because we're hardcore theologians here.
Yeah, Berdyev's not going to fit in this.
Yeah, or comparative lit or something like that. I guess it's interesting because there really isn't a department of prophets, is there? I mean, there's literature and there's philosophy, but there isn't, a department of prophecy.
It's too hard to handle.
Yeah.
Too hot to handle. No one wants to open up that box.
Yeah.
As a study or a discipline.
Yeah.
The nature of it is like critiquing everything they're about or doing. Even academia itself.
it's putting your existential soul on the line, and for better or for worse. And
Yeah.
and then when you look at the fate of most of the prophets, you can see why it wouldn't be necessarily something. Although I'm sure there are people that have done their dissertations on the prophets, and there's many great scholarly books on prophecy. Brueggemann wrote that prophetic
Prophetic imagination.
imagination, yeah, which
Yeah,
is
Bergman, Walter Bergman.
classic. Yeah, um, I don't remember him mentioning Berdyaev though. I mean, I think they're mostly biblical models.
So here's the 10 fun or quirky facts about Nikolai Berdyaev. Number one, he was expelled from the university for Marxist activism, but later became one of Marxism's fiercest spiritual critics. Number two, he hated institutions. He once said that every institution tends to become demonic, including the
Demonic?
church. Demonic.
Yeah.
Number three, he was deported on the philosopher's ship. I don't know why I can't say that word today.
Yeah.
Um, that is really cool. I never knew about that philosopher's ship. In 1922, Lenin exiled him with 150 intellectuals. Fearing their dangerous ideas, Berdyaev called it a death sentence for the soul of Russia. Number four, he loved Dostoevsky and saw himself in the brothers Karamazov, which next is Dostoevsky. So that's kind of why we put him right before that, because he loved Dostoevsky. So we're kind of going backwards on the Russian guys.
Yeah.
He saw Ivan Karamazov and the Grand Inquisitor as perfect metaphors for modern spiritual crisis. Number five, he claimed he never truly converted to Christianity. For him, it was less a moment and more a long return, a slow awakening to a truth he already suspected.
Sounds like Chesterton, huh?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Number six, he lived in voluntary poverty in Paris. Despite being from Russian aristocracy, he gave up the wealth for truth and paid the price.
Mm-hmm.
Number seven, he didn't like being called an academic. He saw himself not as a philosopher in the scholastic sense, but as a prophetic voice, a witness to spiritual truth.
Yeah, we just talked about that.
Yeah. Number eight, he believed creativity was divine. This is where a really unique contribution of him is this emphasis on creativity. He thought human beings were co-creators with God and that art and freedom were sacred acts of resistance.
Yeah, Rick Rubin, if you haven't read him,
Hallelujah.
you gotta get him. He's your man.
Gosh, Rick Rubin, you'll love this book, the Creative Act, if you read it. He probably did. I'm suspecting. But
Yeah.
anyways, we'll see. He once debated communists on stage and won over the crowd. His passionate defense of human dignity often left his ideological opponents shaken.
Yeah.
And number 10, he was read and admired by both anarchists and Catholic mystics. Figures as diverse as Dorothy Day, Jacques Maritain, and even existential atheists found inspiration in his writings.
Yeah. Yeah, because of his deep spiritual humanism, human beings are their freedom first, and their dignity is central, and everything else derives from that. And you don't have to create, utopian political systems. The dignity and freedom are birthrights, and not all men are created equal. All men are created free. That's for him. It's primary. And then out of that freedom comes their equality and their dignity and their capacity for creation and creativity and creation. So wow, he's really a revolutionary voice that is worth paying attention to even now.
Yeah, one of the points about that freedom and creativity together is that he didn't see Christianity as, or he was critical of Christianity in its authoritarian sense, and he's critical of the secular left with its collectivism and kind of coercion.
Yeah.
The thing he saw in Christianity was a revolutionary spirit, like existential resistance to both or to any other influence other than love.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like making love a political resistance.
Yeah, well, that's why he liked Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor, identified with that story that was written by one of the characters in the Brothers Karamazov, Ivan, who's the intellectual brother. So I think he identified with the intellectual brother, and the Grand Inquisitor was Dostoevsky's sort of image of a religious head of the Inquisition, whose job it was to, bring about the conversion of the masses through terror and violence, and which,
Was it a Christian character, the Inquisitor?
yeah, he was the
Like a coercive religion sort of character?
he was like, I think, the he could be seen as the Antichrist, or he could be seen as the Pope, or as the head of the Inquisition, who had a philosophical justification for uh, enforcing Christianity through violence.
Mm.
And we'll talk about it when we get to Dostoevsky, but the fascinating thing is that Christ, the conceit in the story is that Christ comes back, and so the Grand Inquisitor brings him in for interrogation, and he says, "Okay, before we begin, I just want to let you know that at the end of the Bible, it says you can't add anything to the Bible, so you can't talk. I'm the only one who can talk, and I interpret everything you already said. So you just listen to me, and I'm going to tell you how it's going to go. We got your number. We're running the show here. You can't talk anymore. So I don't really know why you came back again, because you're superfluous." And he goes on in that vein.
That's cool.
And Christ is listening to this whole thing. And then at the end, he kisses the guy on the mouth. And the Grand Inquisitor is like, doesn't know how to take that. And because he's not adding anything to the other than the kiss.
So subversive.
But we'll have to. It's one of those great works that has led to countless theological and spiritual interpretations of that ending, and even multiple interpretations by the characters in the novel. And so we have the intellectual brother who wrote it sees his story one way, and then his spiritual brother who hears it sees it another way, and they debate the meaning of his own story. And we'll talk about that when we get to Dostoevsky. But you could see why that would fascinate Berdyaev, because he's been around Christs and antichrists and prophets and false prophets, and he's seen the revolution, the great hope of the Russian Revolution, and then its betrayal, and then it's turning into a anti-revolution and a totalitarian regime, and and he's there just trying to speak the truth to power as best he can. Just powerful stuff.
This statement is interesting, that his critique of both Marxism and bourgeois liberalism was rooted in his Orthodox faith, not in some middle of the road centrism.
Yes,
that's exactly interesting, because he's not saying here's the third way ideology that's just called centrism.
Yeah,
but he said it's this explosive belief in the human person made in the image of a free, creative God. So it's a very theologically rooted concept of freedom and resistance to right and left and any political ideology, really. And here's one of his quotes: "The kingdom of God is freedom. It is not order. Order is the kingdom of Caesar.
Yes.
This single sentence dismantles much of what has been passed on as political theology in the American landscape. And for Berdyaev, faith was never about submission to an earthly order, left or right, but a spiritual awakening that resists all systems that dehumanize.
Yeah, and we forget that, Berdyaev was exiled to Paris, but then Paris got invaded by the Nazis in 1940. So he saw the face of Caesar in Russia, and then he saw the face of Caesar again in the Nazi occupation of Paris. And both times it was, but that doesn't change my prophetic defense of human freedom and
Wait,
creativity.
did you say face of Caesar in these characters?
Yeah,
Did he frame it that way?
I don't know. I'm sure.
Or did you?
Sure he could have.
Well, face of Caesar in fill in the blank is kind of a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, yeah. It's worship of power and the effort that it takes to try to take away human freedom and divinity of God and his people made in his image is just basic sacrilege. I think what was it that Chesterton called it? He called it a daily mysticism, an everyday mysticism. And I think for Berdyaev, it's mysticism's the same thing. It's a daily, every moment reality that if you're not seeing, you're betraying. And for Chesterton, mysticism was the only thing that could keep you sane, because otherwise you end up on some sort of power trip where you're reducing the mystery to some sort of program that you got going, some system.
So it sounds like according to Berdyaev, there really is no freedom outside of Christ.
Yeah, I think for Berdyaev, that's true.
That's what he's saying. Like, it's so theologically rooted. Creativity and freedom and love are all so divine, and that's what gives us human freedom.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting to compare him to Sartre, because Sartre famously said, he was never so free as when the Nazis occupied Paris, because it changed every choice he made into an existential choice about whether he was going to live or die, whether he was going to live in freedom or live in fear. And there's that famous story where a student comes to him and says, I have a difficult choice to make. My mother's sick and I want to stay home and take care of her. But the resistance fighter that's my friend wants me to join his cadre. And he tells me I should become a freedom fighter as part of the resistance. And I don't know whether I should stay home, take care of my mother, or join the resistance.
This was Sartre?
Yeah, this was the question that was posed to Sartre. And supposedly Sartre said, well, there is no right or wrong answer. You're free. You have to choose and commit. And both of those choices are good choices, but you're free, that is to say, create. And so it was basically, you're free, you create. Nobody can tell you what your conscience is telling you, the person that you should be, or what the choice is. And if you rely on the party to tell you, you're giving up your humanity. And if you rely on your mom to tell you, you're giving up your autonomy as well. So you have to take responsibility, right? Commitment is responsibility, and responsibility derives from freedom. And it isn't to say that all those choices are relative, but in this particular case, they're pretty close to being two very um, honorable choices either way. Uh,
Yeah.
and that it's not anything that another person can presume to make for you, outside of your own conscience and your own relationship to the divine. And Berdyaev would probably see that clearer than Sartre, I think.
Yeah.
He's sort of saying God's asking you to make to make a choice about, who you are, and you want to co-create your life with him. You don't want to just choose independently of your role in the scheme of things. And,
Along the lines of freedom is here's one of the readings
yeah.
that also, I guess, fuses the freedom is rooted in spiritual truth and the creativity of God, actually,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is interesting. I never linked those two, freedom and creativity.
Mhm.
Like as your main idea of freedom being rooted in the creative act of God, and the ability for you to act in that way because you're in the image of that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
he kind of says that in this Freedom in the Spirit book.
Hmm.
This reading says, Christianity is the religion of divine and human freedom. It's not what the modern culture thinks.
Yeah.
It brings not law, not commandments, not coercion, but the image of the God man and the call to freely follow him. Where there is no freedom, there can be no love, no creativity, no personhood. The kingdom of God is not established by force, nor can it be imposed from above. It must be born from within. In this lies the scandal and greatness of Christianity, that it entrusts the fate of the world to the inner freedom of man. God does not desire slaves, but sons. That which is compulsory is unworthy of God. Freedom is not a gift man receives from society or the state. It is the image of God in him.
Whoa. Hey, can you imagine him saying that at a debate with a Marxist?
Dude, they would just not even know what to do with that. They'd have to say it's hogwash, but it just ignited everyone in the room's conscience.
Oh, yeah.
They know it's true just by hearing it, you know. It's like so evident
Well,
in your spirit if you can believe you have one.
it's like the very thing which both excites and troubles you about your spirit.
Yeah.
You're free, but that means you're responsible. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like you're 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 not off the hook, but you're not uh, on the philosopher ship as an exile either. You're you're co-creating with the divine, and you have a responsibility to yourself and to creation. Uh,
Yeah.
oh, that's
The
powerful stuff. I can see why um, the creative act book would be probably very inspirational. Check that out. See what
yeah.
what he says there.
This
And the other thing about that kind of thing, that kind of statement is, it's not really one that you can reduce to two competing syllogisms, or break it down into some sort of analytic framework, because it's so existential in the sense of, your definition of your own relationship to your choices is so subjective, so Kierkegaardian, that uh, it doesn't lend itself to easily parsing. You either get it or you don't, or you either reject it or accept it. It's pretty, right out there.
that's what's so powerful. You can hear it in Berdyaev and Kierkegaard is that deeply honest challenge to yourself and like as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And like as Kierkegaard was saying, like yourself, like does yourself even know yourself? Sort of
Right.
a
Yes.
depth of, and I guess that's where existentialism is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore I think it was needed, like it's a needed discipline,
Yeah.
existentialism, rather than a philosophical idea. I think it's almost like an actual discipline to know yourself and to know what's real. It's like a venture into how do I even know things?
Yeah. What did it?
Epistemology.
Yeah. What did Kierkegaard say? The self was a relation to itself. And if you don't have a relation to yourself, then yourself becomes like a role you play, or it's a definition from someplace else that you're um, impersonating or something.
Yeah.
So to have a relationship to yourself as defining the self um, is a pretty profound beginning for philosophy, rather than just assuming that you know that you have a self because you buy clothes or whatever, or you see yourself in the mirror or whatever.
Yeah, that whole concept in Kierkegaard, which I hear echoing in Berdyaev, is like if you don't know, if you're not, so to the modern person right now, like if you can't sit under a tree
Mm-hmm.
quietly for 30 minutes,
Yeah.
you probably don't know yourself at all.
Yeah.
And I think our culture is in a crisis in that way. Like I don't think many people can sit under a tree quietly for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm not making up some random arbitrary law. I'm just saying like if you can't sit with yourself quietly with your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts and like
Mm-hmm.
relate to yourself and play back and think through and have a relationship with yourself, then there's a problem. You're completely disconnected and everything you're doing is a reflection of everyone else.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
probably don't have a single original thought ricocheting around in your head right now because you're so influenced by everybody else. And that concludes episode 10, part 1 on Nikolai Berdyaev. I hope you're resonating with the powerful ideas and these people's powerful stories. It might hit different depending on your spiritual location, whether you're agnostic, a skeptic, a believer, or somewhere in between on some kind of deconstruction journey. We're going to continue exploring what it means to live a life of deep meaning in a world that often feels fragmented and nihilistic. And this general revelation doesn't seem to come to us from the expected places. It's not confined to pulpits or seminaries. The prophetic voice is breaking through in novels, poetry, charity work, art, and the unexpected corners of culture. Voices crying out from the edges of society. We hope you'll continue to join us on this ongoing conversation. Until then, thank you for listening to the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast. If you found this meaningful, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with anyone who might resonate with this conversation. Adios. Spiritually, I want to jump off a cliff without a parachute like I'm high on cannabis and skip through fields naked like I wonder if. This has been the Subversive Orthodoxy podcast with Travis Mullen and Professor Inchasti. Forgetting the world's lies, meanwhile I'm fine. Looking through a stained glass oceanic scene. Say hi to human beings with a smile unseen. Grabbing wildflowers as I slide down hills after a rain.